Hello, everyone. It's just past 10, so I think we will go ahead and start. Welcome to everyone to this roundtable organized by the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. My name is Susanna Lidström, and I will moderate this event. The topic for the conversation today is opportunities in the BBNJ Agreement for advancing climate actions in the deep ocean. Our aim with this discussion is to identify prioritized climate actions in the deep ocean that can be pursued using the mechanisms provided by the Agreement on the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Marine Biological Diversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, or the BBNJ Agreement for short. Oh no, my slide is not advancing. Sorry. There we go. Sorry about that. Here is the program for today. We will begin with an introduction to the relationship between climate change, the deep ocean, and the BBNJ Agreement. We will then have a set of 4 discussions, each focusing on one of the 4 different parts of the BBNJ Agreement, including area-based management tools, environmental impact assessments, marine genetic resources, and capacity building and transfer of marine technology. Each of these discussions will have just under 20 minutes, and this will include a short introduction by one of our speakers, and that speaker will then also host a discussion where we hope to hear from as many of you as possible that we have time for, and to hear your questions, your comments, and your ideas on this topic. In the discussion, we encourage everyone to raise their hand and speak directly so that everyone can hear you. You can also pose a question in the chat, and we can then call on you to read out your question. With that, we will move to the introduction, which will be given by Lisa Levin, Distinguished Professor Emerita at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at University of California, San Diego. For this part, there will not be a Q&A since it's meant to provide background information to the 4 subsequent discussions. So I will stop sharing and hand it over to Lisa.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. Are my slides showing okay?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, great. So I will be talking about the interaction of the deep ocean and climate change as it relates to the BBNJ Agreement. And I'm going to start, although most of you are familiar with the deep ocean, I just want to define it. We consider this the ocean below 200 meters.
It's now on the VSTV stand, the top.
And okay, there's some background noise there. So by this definition, most of the ocean is, in fact, the deep sea. It covers 75% of our exclusive economic zones and 96% of areas beyond national jurisdiction. But most of this is actually out of the public eye. Now, although I talk about the deep sea, it's not actually a single ecosystem. There are many different ecosystems. In the water column, there are different ecosystems, the mesopelagic, the deep pelagic, and even low oxygen zones. We have different systems of deep sea sediments on the continental slope, in vast abyssal plains, in our trenches. We have different hard ground ecosystems. There are thousands of canyons and tens of thousands of seamounts that provide habitat. And we have even the animals themselves making habitat. We have biogenic reefs formed by sponges and corals. We have chemosynthetic ecosystems like hydrothermal vents and methane seeps and organic falls. And all of these different ecosystems host distinct biodiversity. And that biodiversity provides a myriad of ecosystem services. Some of these we consider regulating services, carbon cycling, and nutrient regeneration. The deep sea provides a space for our communications cables. It's a source of energy at this point, oil and gas, but also soon offshore wind. It's a source of deep sea fisheries. We are beginning to bioprospect in the deep sea for new pharmaceuticals, for climate solutions, for different types of biomimicry. The deep sea is a source of inspiration for the arts, and it's a very important has very important cultural and spiritual values for many peoples. And increasingly, we're looking to the deep ocean as a place to put unwanted waste, things like carbon dioxide. When we think about the climate services provided to the deep sea, we begin with the biological pump, where phytoplankton photosynthesize, and this leads to the drawdown of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Those phytoplankton aggregate and sink into the deep ocean, or they're eaten by zooplankton, which migrate and produce fecal pellets, and that carbon entering the deep ocean is retained for hundreds to thousands of years. Also, the fish and marine mammals contribute to contribute to the carbon cycle through food webs, through vertical migrations, and even through the sinking of carcasses like whale falls. And once on the seafloor, all these different ecosystems that I discussed play important roles in gathering and sequestering carbon. Some, like methane seeps, actually also filter methane emanating from beneath the seafloor and prevent it from getting into the atmosphere, or hydrothermal vents, which contribute to fertilizing the ocean and enabling the biological pump to work. So biodiversity plays a very important role. We have climate change happening at the surface of the ocean, but thermohaline circulation draws this into the deep sea and leads to warming of the deep waters. This leads to species migrations. Tuna are one example, but there are others. The drawdown of oxygen leads to biodiversity loss, habitat compression, altered food webs, and ocean acidification harms calcifying species and can lead to loss of critical fish habitat and biodiversity. So addressing climate change, we know, will protect this biodiversity and its carbon services. The science we do has revealed that the ocean is highly connected through vertical migrations of animals, through horizontal migrations, and through physical processes. And this means that what we do in one part of the ocean affects the other parts of the ocean. So I'd like to turn now to the BBNJ Agreement. This applies to the 60% of the ocean that's in international waters. It's been signed by 145 countries and ratified by 75 thus far. And it has 4 primary components. It involves area-based management, marine genetic resources, environmental impact assessments, and capacity building and transfer of marine technology. And we're going to hear about all of these today. But I want to just talk about how climate change appears in the text in these elements. First, we see climate change in the preamble of the BBNJ Agreement. It recognizes the need to address climate change impacts on marine ecosystems, such as warming and ocean deoxygenation, as well as ocean acidification. We see climate change referred to in the definition of cumulative impacts. It includes the consequences of climate change and ocean acidification. In the general principles and approaches, we see reference to an approach that builds ecosystem resilience to the adverse effects of climate change and ocean acidification, and also reference to restoring and maintaining ecosystem integrity, including the carbon cycle services that underpin the role of the ocean in climate. In part 3, in the area-based management section, we see reference to an objective to strengthen resilience to stressors, including those related to climate change, ocean acidification. In Annex 1, which gives the criteria for identifying MPAs, we see reference to vulnerability, including to climate change and ocean acidification. And then finally in Annex 2, which gives examples of the types of capacity building that can occur, there's reference to the sharing of data, knowledge, and research on stressors in the ocean, including the adverse effects of climate change, such as warming, ocean deoxygenation, as well as ocean acidification. So you can see reference to climate is sprinkled throughout the agreement text. And my last couple of slides, I want to talk about what can the agreement do with reference to climate change. I feel like the most important thing perhaps is to protect or at least very important, is to protect the ocean carbon cycle. Area-based management tools can be used to protect areas that are critical for productivity and carbon sequestration. They can protect areas from activities that release carbon, for example, from the seafloor. They can protect areas vulnerable to climate change. They can protect habitat corridors and climate refugia, and in general, protect the biodiversity that makes the carbon cycle happen in the deep sea. The Part 4 on environmental impact assessments can build climate impacts into strategic environmental assessment and into impact assessment, monitoring, assessment of cumulative impacts, and so on, and can build in estimating the greenhouse gas footprint. The marine genetic resources component, Part 2, can enable discovery and benefit sharing of genetic resources that involve solutions to climate change. It can help develop best practices and integrate adaptive and integrated use and conservation of genetic resources in the context of climate change. And then the capacity development and transfer of marine technology section, Part 4, can focus on capacity for assessing and reducing carbon footprints, evaluating marine carbon dioxide removal, early warning systems, predictive modeling, can link biodiversity to climate smart fisheries management, and enhance observations in the deep sea, including the recording of climate change and its impacts. And I will stop there and thank everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's fantastic. We will now move to our first topic for discussion, which is area-based management tools. This will be introduced and the discussion and hosted by Anna Metaxas, Killen Professor at the Department of Oceanography at Dalhousie University. Anna?
Hello, greetings to everybody. Thank you for joining us. So yeah, as Susanna said, I will sort of start talking a little bit. I'll give a little bit of presentation on this one of the pillars of the BBNJ. You'll hear some of the things reiterated from what Lisa said, and then hopefully we will spare on some discussion. So there's a lot of question about what is this area-based management tools, and it also says, including networks of marine protected areas. And there's also sometimes some confusion about what the difference between the two is. So I thought I would try to address that. So in terms of area-based management tools, here what we have is the tool in itself is essentially a geographically defined area where there are several sectors or activities that are taking place, and those activities are managed with the aim being to achieve some particular conservation objective, but also sustainable use. So in contrast, a marine protected area is also a geographically defined marine area, but here there is it's designated specifically to achieve some long-term biological diversity conservation objective, and may or may not, depending on what the impact is, allow some sustainable use. So some activities may allow it, but they have to be consistent with the conservation objectives. So that is the main sort of, one is a management tool, the other one is very much a conservation tool. And so I will like to sort of mention some of the objectives that are given in the in this particular pillar of the BBNJ, and in relation to both climate but also conservation. So first of all, one of the objectives, and those are not all of them, one of the objectives suggests that we need to conserve and sustainable use areas that require protection. So conservation, sustainable use, one of the motivations. But the other one is to also strengthen cooperation and coordination in the use of those areas among states, frameworks, global, regional, et cetera, bodies. And so the idea here is that the BBNJ agreement is not going to do this on its own, but rather, in collaboration and cooperation with something like frameworks that come out of the UNFCCC. And then, of course, specifically the objective that relates to, as Lisa was referring to climate, is to, when we're protecting, is a view to enhance the resilience of stressors, including those from climate change, oceanification, et cetera. So there's 3 prongs here: conserve, coordination, and strengthen resilience, including to climate. And so then we have 2 issues here that we're dealing with. One is we're trying to protect ecosystems from impacts of climate change. And the second one is, as Lisa suggested, is actually protect the carbon cycle. And so those are not mutually exclusive, and you can't really do one without the other, but they may be perceived as 2 different objectives that need to be pursued. So where do we start? Wow, that's a big blue ocean there. And there's a lot of places where we can be thinking about ABMTs or networks of marine protected areas. One way to move forward is to make use of a tool that the Convention on Biological Diversity has been using for a very long time, and it's now become reinvigorated, which are the ecologically and biologically significant areas. You see those here, they're in different colors depending on their dynamic or static, but these sort of colored polygons indicate locations in the ocean that have been identified as significant ecologically and or biologically by groups of experts that got together and put the data together and said, okay, these are areas that we may want to think they're important. There's no management implications here in the EPSAs themselves, but they can provide a good starting point of where do we start in that big blue ocean. And so in terms of where do we start, we often think about protection in 2 dimensions. But again, Lisa mentioned that we need to think about those arrows in different directions. And I would like to reinforce this with these pictures where we see on the far left, we see animals like albatross or sharks that tend to live near the surface of the ocean. And we also see whales that spend a lot of time at the surface of the ocean, but they also dive thousands of meters to feed. Then we see the pictures from the mesopelagic, which we know is now becoming increasingly attractive for fisheries. And those animals that live in the mesopelagic zone, that's those jellies that you see, and the fishes, the funky looking fishes, these are animals that migrate every day, as Lisa suggested, from the depth to the surface and back, and connect those 2 layers, and at the same time, transfer carbon across those 2 layers. And then, of course, we get to the bottom, the seabed, and there we have sources of carbon that come from the surface, like the whale carcass that you see there, or the methane seeps, as Lisa suggested. But at the same time, we have forests of deep water corals that are actually filter all that carbon that is coming through in forms of particles so they can sustain themselves. So there's a lot that is going on in the vertical in addition to the horizontal. And of course, again, as Lisa was suggesting, when we're thinking about the carbon cycle, we think about the biological bump, and a lot of those both slides indicate arrows. That means that material carbon is moving all the way from the atmosphere all the way down to the deep seabed and back up. And so again, we have this sort of approach of thinking more in addition to the horizontal, the vertical, capturing the entire water column when we think about management, when we think about marine protected areas. And this is a relatively new approach in conservation. It hasn't been, in the last 10 years or so, we have started thinking about doing this. And you see an example here of a study that came up with a design for protecting a seamount in the entire water column from the surface all the way down to the seabed. And what that achieved is the zooplankton layer right near the surface, all the way down to the deep sea invertebrates. And so you're capturing that entire sequence of ecosystems and all those connections between them, including nutrient cycles and carbon cycles. And of course, the elephant in the room is climate, and starting to think about how we're going to design those area-based management tools in marine protected areas in a way that they're what is called climate smart. What this means is that we don't put something in place now that becomes obsolete in 20, 30 years because it's completely destroyed by climate change, but rather we think about where we place our MPAs and our MBMTs in places where it will make sense in the future. There will remain significant areas in the future rather than be heavily impacted. And so when we think about how to do this for species, for ecosystems, some of the current approaches that you see there, there's sort of range shifts. So you make sure you encompass any range shifts by different species. You include climate refugia, as Lisa was suggesting. You think about climate corridors that fall under climate connectivity. And you also think about adaptation potential. So you may want to think about animals or species that are will be adapted to climate change, or they have a wider range of tolerance, and then think about where you protect those. And so what you see there is an example of a cycle of that whole process of how we're going to think about moving forward. And of course, we always start with available data. This is one reason why I suggest the EPSAs as a starting point. Then, of course, we have the conservation goals and objectives that need to identify it for these MBMTs and the MPAs, and those can be both ecosystem specific or specific to carbon cycle. We review what we have, which at the moment is not a lot in terms of MBMTs, and then you identify new ones, and those new ones is where this climate smart prioritization comes into the picture. And then we have implementation, of course, monitoring, and then we fall into the adaptive management scenarios, will then allow us to maybe, again, see how those MPAs and MBMTs are doing. So this is a cycle that I think could be quite useful. It's we often talk about this type of approach, but this is sort of putting the climate smart component into it in terms of how we think about conservation planning. So I'll stop here, and I'll be happy to sort of get the conversation going in terms of questions or comments that people may have. I will stop sharing. There. I see some comments in the chat. Sherry, did you want to read it out or tell us about it?
Yeah, sorry, I came in quite late, and I feel like I'm one of those late attenders who just showed up. But I'm a protector of my a particular zone in our province. I'm from Canada. The Treaty 6 territory is actually the northern part of Canada. So my question really is how to actualize a number of these cycles, and these are important because we have policy or what we call the Canada Water Act, very much an important act that we have guidelines to follow, but we're interested in how the adaptation will take place if we have interbasin transfers of a number of these large rivers. One of our largest rivers is the Athabasca River, and it has been drawn and over allocated for like 400 of years, but our water licenses aren't really being updated for conservation planning, other than we have water conservation objectives. So we say that the in-stream needs for a number of these rivers should be included in a number of the policies that we put forward. And I'm just really curious, do you have a water registry that you could possibly look at or recommend? And if that makes sense to how water is allocated, how's that?
Are you referring to how water is allocated within the country or between nations in areas. So in areas beyond national jurisdiction, of course, water belongs to everybody and belongs to nobody, which is what makes the management so difficult. But are you referring to the rivers within Canada and how water is allocated there?
Yeah, she says transboundary waters. Yes.
Transboundary waters. I am not sure in terms of legally how this is allocated, and I may throw this out to Christina, perhaps, or Christine.
I think it's largely an issue sort of very close to shore that was transboundary and between states. That was, so sorry, Sherry, this is a webinar focusing on areas beyond national jurisdiction, many of the high seas and the deep seabed. You have very legitimate questions, and I hope somebody can answer them perhaps in the comment line. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Christina.
Can I
so
jump
think
in
we can
with a
take-
comment about
Yes.
that? It's
Yes.
really important to realize that the ocean controls the hydrologic cycle on the planet. And so areas beyond national jurisdiction will have a lot to do with whether we have drought on land and whether, or atmospheric rivers or whatever. I'm not an expert on this, but there is a connection there.
Yes, there is. Thank you, Lisa. Okay, there's
I
a
think
question.
Rachel
Oh,
is next. I think your hand was raised.
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. I guess this is a question that that goes out a little bit to those of you who've been part of the preparation stage. I haven't been to the last two sessions for preparing for the COP. So for all of you, my name's Rachel, and I'm a chief scientist at Sintef Ocean. It's a research institute in Norway. I work a lot on both mesopelagics, and I work on plastics. I work on a whole bunch of issues related to the ocean. So what I'm wondering a little bit about is there set up some kind of mechanism for collaboration between, for example, RFMOs and the COP in terms of both data sharing into the clearinghouse mechanism, but also in terms of just discussions and communication. And I do know like these are the same countries, but they're not the same people. So for those of you that are very familiar with the prep comms that are ongoing now, it's like what exactly are they planning in terms of this collaboration in terms of area-based management and how they can actually come up with good solutions with those that are actually using the ocean?
Christine, that's all yours. You've been attending all the prep comms.
Yes, thank you. And thanks for the question, Rachel. Really nice to see you. We've missed you at the last prep comms. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So arrangements to enhance cooperation, not just within the BBNJ agreement and the subsidiary bodies that make up this agreement, but also with other instruments, frameworks, and bodies which are called IFBs in the BBNJ world. That is one of the big topics that we are looking at in the PrepCom. And as a preparatory type of meeting, of course, nothing is decided until it's decided at that first COP. But some of the things that have been discussed have been put down in different documents issued by the interim secretariat, Dwalas, who did a quite thorough analysis of the cooperative arrangements that other IFBs use. And these include arrangements such as consultation arrangements, maybe secretariat to secretariat, attending each other's meetings, these types of things, shared reporting. So all of these different options that we see under other instruments, frameworks, and bodies are still on the table. And from the observer's perspective, just observing this process, it seems like all of them have been seen quite favorably. So we'll probably end up with a mixture of a range of different cooperative arrangements, similar to what we see in practice.
Christine, do you want to maybe comment though a little bit on that idea of BBNJ is not supposed to undermine and how this may come in and play, throw in some curveballs? And I mean, it sounds great. They're all going to cooperate, but will they really cooperate? I'm thinking, for example, International Seabed Authority and BBNJ, for example.
Yeah, That's an excellent question and a very challenging one. So thank you for that question. I think from the beginning of the negotiations until now, people who have been attending or been involved will understand that this won't be a given and that perhaps it will still remain a challenge as we go towards implementation stage. It's all good to have stuff on paper saying we will cooperate, we will do this, but as I don't know if this is an international saying, but as Canadians like to say, the proof is in the pudding. And so we will have to see what that turns out looking like. I think one of the things that we are seeing already is a really strong will to engage with the BBNJ process. So in other processes, they've already went through these discussions in their conference of the parties or their meeting of the governing parties. And many have issued documents about how they will engage with the BBNJ process and through what mechanisms. So I think the appetite to engage is there. And of course, we just need to put it into practice. And Christina has something to add to this.
Yes.
Well, Christina is 100% correct. The proof is in the pudding. But the BBNJ agreement also has another important provision, which is about promoting the objectives of the BBNJ agreement in other bodies. That's so in the International Seabed Authority, for example, there's pretty much complementary membership between what will become the BBNJ agreement and the International Seabed Authority, because the Seabed Authority are all parties to the Law of the Sea Convention. And by promoting the objectives, then you're able to sort of prevent the perception of undermining and hopefully promote some form of cooperation. Alice Ikabarunu, would you like to step in here? Maybe she's choking. She's with DeWallace, the Secretariat. That was, and the BBNJ agreement also has the Implementation and Compliance Committee, which could theoretically be sort of used to monitor and report on what's happening in other bodies. That was, are they having challenges in getting consensus? What are the big obstacles there? And hopefully try to come together and find some mechanism for cooperation. Alice, happy to turn it over to you.
I think that was an accident. Maria, you have I think you have a comment that may be kind of relating to this, well, indirectly. So would you like to make a comment? Yeah.
Thanks very much. Yes, I mean, Christina just mentioned the requirement for monitoring and accountability, and it strikes me that we have so many new technologies and tools for monitoring, including drones, which I understand can also be deployed underwater. But I'm wondering, is there some way that we can use continuous video or perhaps random video takes of activities that do have the potential, even though they may be licensed as sustainable use, to actually not be sustainable? But in the interest of monitoring the activities and compliance for with the treaties, is there some potential for deploying video or some kind of continuous monitoring that is accessible to the bodies that have to oversee compliance, or to the general public?
Maybe I'll take an initial crack at this, and then I'll turn it to Lisa as well. I'm sure she has thoughts. So of course, yes, we can have technologies. The technologies, we monitor for scientific purposes. We use video, we use sample collections, and in some quite remote parts of the ocean, quite deep, 5,000 meters. So, and as time goes on, I don't think that technology is going to improve, and it's going to perhaps become even more accessible financially. And so the capabilities there and technologically will be there in relatively, within a few years, I would say, and perhaps cheaper. But the question is, whoever is doing the compliance is responsible for assessing compliance, whether they're actually will be doing this. So it's more, in my opinion, it's more a matter of ensuring that the players are willing to play and contribute to both to the cost of doing this, but also to the assessment or whether whatever they're doing is working. We can't have adaptive management or assess whether we're meeting objectives without monitoring. And so, but, you know, who does it? Who pays? Who assesses this? Is not, I don't think when we're in you know, the ABNJ, whether it's that, well, it sounds to me like pretty complicated. But I'll let Lisa, perhaps maybe she can talk a little bit about those technologies and her experience, and then I see hands up, so maybe Rachel can go after
Yes,
Lisa.
and
Okay.
very briefly, please, because we also need to move on to our second theme, but Lisa and Rachel, just very brief comments.
Okay, very briefly. I don't think we're there yet in terms of monitoring with video. We don't have underwater GPS, and we don't have any kind of wireless video connection that can be beamed out to the world. And so maybe someday we will have those two things, but right now you need a cable to a ship, and then you need a ship with a big satellite bulb, and so we have telepresence and people can look at, one image, but really to track all of these things that we need to monitor, I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you. And then I absolutely agree with Lisa in terms of underwater video. There's a lot of other monitoring that's already out there that is free for the taking if someone wants it, though. That's for every single ship that is on the water. Now they routinely have every kind of test you can imagine, whether it's acoustic or it's temperature or salinity. They have all this, but they discard it after 1 year because they're using it for commercial purposes. And a lot of this information could go into a digital twin of the ocean if the data was available and the data was deposited in a place that would be open. So I do think it would be absolutely possible in some way, and not too far of a future, but continuous underwater imagery of a large area that's been protected. I don't know if we'll ever have, but we could have continuous monitoring of other factors and at least imagery at some place. But the technology is usually not the problem, right? I mean, the problem is going to be in finance.
And just Christina, a final word.
Just
This
quickly,
particular.
it's primarily, the monitoring is primarily a sector-based activity. I mean, we have Global Fishing Watch for fishing, and there are other mechanisms to monitor fishing activities. Shipping activities are pretty well monitored, so you can track where the vessels are and what the flag states are. That's in deep seabed mining. It is mandated by the Law of the Sea Convention to be able to put some system in place to monitor what the impacts of the deep sea mining are on the marine environment. We may need technological assistance, but I think Richard Norris points out that there are some equipment there is some equipment that can already be put in place. So I think eventually bringing that all together for a marine protected area where perhaps you don't want some of these activities to be taking place can be a useful mechanism, but we're not there yet. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna, and thank you, everyone. We need to move on to our second topic. So we will go back to Christine Gable from the University of Edinburgh, who will introduce environmental impact assessments. Christine?
Wonderful. Thank you, Susanna. And I trust that you can see my screen, but do stop me if you can't. Yes, Christine Gable, University of Edinburgh, and happy to be here today to chat with you and to give you a very quick whistle-stop tour to environmental impact assessments under the BBNJ Agreement. And as I say, this is very high level, and the aim of it is really just to get discussions going on how this could be a tool to help with climate action. So under the BBNJ Agreement, parties are required to ensure that the potential impacts of planned activities under their jurisdiction or control that take place in areas beyond national jurisdiction are assessed before they are authorized to commence. So the main tool provided to assess such impacts is set out in Part 4 of the agreement, namely environmental impact assessments, or EIAs. which the agreement defines as a process to identify and evaluate the potential impacts of an activity to inform decision-making. Interestingly, the agreement also provides for strategic environmental assessments, or SEAs. Unlike EIAs, SEAs are not obligatory under the agreement, but instead are provided as an optional tool within the BBNJ toolbox. And unlike EIAs, SEAs aren't explicitly defined under the agreement, but it is noted that they can be used to assess plans and programs, and importantly, that they can be a tool to collate and synthesize the best available information regarding an area or a region, including in order to identify future impacts, data gaps, and priorities. So when we look at the objectives set out under the agreement for EIAs, several are highly relevant to our discussions today on enhancing action at the climate biodiversity nexus. So the first one that comes to mind would be the EIA process aims to establish processes and thresholds and other requirements to enable coherent framework for assessing impacts in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So in this way, it explicitly sets out that the aim of EIAs is to ensure that relevant activities are assessed and conducted to prevent, mitigate, and manage significant adverse impacts, including through the consideration of cumulative impacts, which, as we've heard earlier in Lisa's talk, explicitly includes impacts from climate change. And then lastly, I wanted to highlight here that one of the objectives of EIAs under the BBNJ agreement is to build and strengthen the capacity to ensure that all parties can prepare, conduct, and evaluate EIAs and SEAs, which inevitably will have positive effects for mitigating impacts of climate change as well. So the BBNJ agreement also marks a significant step forward for ocean governance, not only by defining EIAs and obligating parties to undertake them for relevant activities, but also because it sets out a framework for conducting EIAs. And this framework consists of 4 components, which I will give you a very, very high level overview of. So the first stage is screening. Under the agreement, parties must undertake screening if a planned activity may have more than a minor or transitory effect, or if the effects are unknown and or poorly understood, which is quite important for the deep sea where we do have a lot of knowledge gaps. If based on the results of this screening, the party has reasonable grounds to believe that the activity may cause substantial pollution of or significant and harmful changes to the marine environment, then an EIA is required. It's important to note, though, that even if this threshold has not been met and an EIA is not required, the party still needs to make such relevant information publicly available through the BBNJ Agreement's clearinghouse mechanism. To explain why. Let's see here. And then the next stage is the scoping stage. So during this stage, parties are to ensure that the key environmental and associated impacts that need to be part of the assessment are identified. So in this regard, the BBNJ agreement explicitly identifies that this could include both environmental and socioeconomic impacts. It also explicitly includes the identification of potential cumulative impacts, which is an important element, particularly when looking at EIAs as a tool to support climate action. As set out in Article 31.1, after screening and scoping, parties shall then assess and evaluate the impacts of relevant planned activities, including the cumulative impacts, on the basis of best available science and scientific information, and where relevant, traditional knowledge of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And lastly, when undertaking an EIA, parties shall ensure that measures to prevent, mitigate, and manage potential adverse effects of the planned activities under their jurisdiction or control are identified and analyzed in order to avoid significant adverse impacts. And importantly, where appropriate, the BBNJ agreement calls for such measures to be incorporated into an environmental management plan. Before we move to discussions, there's a couple other things that I think are really important to note with the BBNJ agreement's EIA process. First is that while the decision as to whether an activity goes forward or not is ultimately taken by the party who has the jurisdiction or control over such planned activity, the agreement does include a call-in mechanism, which those who are part of the negotiating process will remember there was substantial amounts of debate and discussions around this. So this call-in mechanism will allow parties as well as scientific and technical body that's to be established under the agreement to register or provide their views on the screening decisions and on the EIA reports. And then the last thing I want to highlight is that under the BBNJ agreement, the process doesn't stop once the EIA has been done and the activity is commenced. So instead, the party is obliged to undertake ongoing monitoring, reporting, and reviewing of impacts in order to identify unforeseen impacts or changes in conditions. And with that whistle-stop tour of EIAs under the BBNJ agreement complete, I want to raise just a couple cross-cutting opportunities that might spark some discussions for us around EIAs and their role as a tool to mitigate climate. So first, EIAs and SEAs can be seen as a tool to generate more knowledge on climate impacts in the deep ocean. So through the very process of undertaking EIAs and SEAs, scientific information and other knowledge will need to be collected and or collated, much of which is to be made publicly available. So supporting robust EIA processes under the BBNJ agreement therefore can bolster our understanding and our knowledge base. And an important element of this knowledge base relates to cumulative impacts. So as the BBNJ agreement explicitly includes assessing cumulative impacts, including those from climate change, it provides an opportunity to directly link action across biodiversity and climate lenses. And then lastly, something that I'm particularly interested in my own research is around the institutional arrangements, such as the clearinghouse mechanism to be established under the agreement. And this will play a critical role in the EIA process, but currently it's something that exists on paper. And so early consideration of how we operationalize these institutional arrangements is also critical. And with that, I would now like to open the floor for discussions. While I stop sharing my screen, I'll pose a question just to get us going. And the first one is to my fellow panelists around cumulative impacts. So what do you see as the most significant data gaps preventing us from fully assessing cumulative impacts in ABNJ at the moment? And maybe I can pass the floor to Anna or Lisa. Or Rachel.
Yeah, no, I'll have an opinion on anything. No, it's you're missing all data, so I mean that'll be fun. So I'm like, and it's all important for cumulative index. I mean, it's so important, all of it. That's why I was asking in the chat, because you said not all the data had to become available through the clearinghouse mechanism, which is a shame because we do need all the data that exists ever. But do you know anything about what data is not? Is it the data? Is it IP type of data? Or what is it? What is it that they can't share?
Yeah, I think this will be very similar to other processes where we see where some of the information and data will be available and then others that might be restricted by patents or for certain commercial uses, there might be redacted versions of it or summaries, which is very similar to what we see under other processes. And I think that is likely what we'll have with the BBNJ agreement as well.
Thank
Lisa,
you.
you wanna?
Should I jump in?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, It's a very hard question, climate change and cumulative impacts. But I think one of the things that we often forget is that climate change is not a static thing. It's an ongoing process. And that 20 or 30 years from now, the deep ocean will be a different deep ocean. And EIAs that are looking at impacts of something that might go on for 20 to 30 years, such as seabed mining or MCDR, marine carbon dioxide removal, or some of the other deep ocean uses. I think we have to think about it in the context of the baseline we have now is not the ocean we will have in the future. And this is one of our big challenges and gaps, is that we're going to have to use climate projections and modeling to look forward to best evaluate what these impacts are going to be.
Absolutely. And does anyone have anything else to add on to that one, or any other questions they want to pose to the group? I see Christina's hand. And
yeah,
then
I'll just
followed
jump
by
in
Anna.
and say Lisa's answer really underscores the need for much more research on what the impacts of climate change will be on the deep ocean if we're going to have activities that are in fact sustainable and not undermining some of the climate processes that we already rely on. So that baseline information as a requirement for EIAs is really critical. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna.
Yeah, I think one of the, I agree both with sort of Lisa's understated statement and sort of Christina's augmentation of its importance. One of the things that we don't often think about, but we hear a lot about, what is the problem in other systems in the deep sea is, of course, tipping points. And so we have no idea what, you know, the thresholds are beyond which systems just, you know, they tip over, and then returning to the previous state is actually not even possible. And I think that's where perhaps cumulative impacts of climate and other stressors in the deep sea may have, because the deep sea is an environment, well, a lot of the ecosystems in the deep sea are ecosystems that are not used to large fluctuations in conditions. I think that's where cumulative impacts that may appear small by their own can actually, when they're together, push it over a tipping point, and then we're going to have a completely different system. And I don't think it's going to be that the tipping point is not that far, because the conditions are not that variable in a lot of the systems.
Richard, do you want to read out your question?
Actually, I think that, so I had two different topics that I brought up. You know, so one was about the scale of a project that becomes sort of, you know, that has to be dealt with under the BBNJ. And I presume that most of these things we're thinking about are commercial, things like mining or deep sea fishing or things, you know, waste disposal, that kind of stuff. So there's a commercial component to it. And then the other thing was just sort of a plea that we have quite a lot of, you know, information scattered, admittedly, you know, about biological resources in the deep sea, sediments, rock types, you know, all sorts of stuff like that. And it's, you know, these are in archives that are oftentimes very difficult to link together. And it seems to me that this would be quite a worthwhile effort, you know, to try to establish better linkages and cross correlation between what's in public archives. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your questions. For the first one, the scale of the project that would be considered by the BBNJ agreement, I think it doesn't necessarily go by the scale of the project, but first where the project is taking place. So it would have to fall under the scope of the BBNJ agreement, so areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it doesn't necessarily, in my reading of the agreement, have to be a commercial venture. It would just have to be something that has the potential to pass the threshold set out in the agreement. So it's impact-based, and there has been discussions both in the room of the negotiators and also in academic discussions about whether scientific research and different types of scientific research would fall under that, or efforts to clean the ocean. We see some maybe plastic removal operations, and whether even if you have good intention but it passes that threshold, does that trigger the need to do an EIA? In my opinion, if it goes by impact, then yes, but that's still very much being debated. And then your second point about how can we link better, I 100% agree with you. The clearinghouse mechanism, it does have some opportunities to help us link better, but again, it is not going to be a silver bullet, and you'll only get out of it what you put into it. And linking with several databases can be challenging, let alone linking with what you're describing, which sounds very much like the dark data, where we don't have it digitized yet, or we don't have it connected with OBIS or other well-established platforms. So I think it's just raising a lot of really important critical issues that we need to consider going forward if we want to meet the objectives of the BBNJ agreement or the high hopes that go along with it.
Yeah, and we can have, I see 2 hands, so very briefly, because we also need to move on to the third topic. But yes, let's hear from Partho and Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. So my suggestion to the panel is that I want to just share a few points because I am energy, like I have worked extensively in the field of solar wind hybrids and other energy systems. So what I feel is that with the advent of offshore wind turbines, so the avian biodiversity is getting affected adversely because there are collisions with the wind turbines and the birds, and many a times these species are endangered or critically endangered. So we need to look at those things. And apart from that, now subsea turbines are also becoming popular. So I think that will have an adverse effect on the marine species that are there. So I think that can affect biodiversity adversely in the oceans. And apart from that, I also feel that there is we need to explore the need for bioremediation to clear the to address the plastic challenge. Particularly, we have species like Ideonella sacchinensis who can sequester plastic waste. So that can be deployed to how that can be deployed to clear plastic waste. I think we need to look into those things also. In turn, it can have a positive effect on biodiversity in the region. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Partho. Those are really good points. And with the first one on the offshore wind turbines, I'm not aware of offshore wind in ABNJ at the moment, but I was part of a discussion not too long ago where it was sit at a table and imagine future uses for these really remote parts of the ocean and to try to get a head start on mitigating some of the impacts. And this is something that came up in our discussions. So I do think that people are starting to think about it, but absolutely it does have some impacts that need to be mitigated. Rachel.
Yeah, I got so lost in all this awesome stuff that Partho was just talking about that I kind of forgot my own question. But now Richard, Richard was what I was coming back to, and the clearinghouse mechanism, and it was all this data that Richard was talking about because I was at a meeting with Equinor, this big oil company in Norway, and they were also saying we have drawers filled with data if somebody wants to take them and just do something with them. And that's the problem again, right? You come back to one, funding, but also to data standardization. How do you standardize all this data? You have videos, you have acoustics, you have someone who's written something in a log. You have so much data. Like at this moment here, you almost have too much data, but you don't have any way of harmonizing it to making it usable. And I'll get back to the point, which was a clearinghouse mechanism. I wanted to ask you about that, Christine. Have they, do they know what it is yet? Like, what will it be?
Well, primarily it will be a mechanism to exchange information amongst parties to the agreement. And this information can be procedural information, notifications for activities, or notifications for consultations for EIAs and ABMTs, but it could also be seen as a bigger thing that holds data. I won't go into it in detail now because we are quickly running out of time, but I just published a paper a couple months ago on the clearinghouse mechanism. If you Google Gable and clearinghouse, it will come up, and we map out all the potential functions for the mechanism across all 4 parts of the agreement with some pretty neat diagrams.
I
So
will
that might
totally do that right now. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank-
and I think
yes.
that's probably us, isn't it, Susanna, for this
Yes,
section?
true. Yes. Thank you so much, Christine. And thank you everyone for your excellent questions and comments. Next, we will turn to marine genetic resources. This topic will be introduced by Marcel Jaspers, Professor of Organic Chemistry at University of Aberdeen. Marcel?
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen at this point.
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Okay, so I'm taking a slightly different tack. I won't talk too much about the agreement itself. I'll talk about the potential of marine genetic resources in mitigating climate change, because the area I come from is biotechnology and bioprospecting, so I'll describe it that way. If I can make the slide move forward. So first of all, there's of course a lot of definitions around marine genetic resources, and this lovely diagram from a report that was written some time ago gives you the idea of between the biological diversity and then talking about the I'll put a little genetic resource or the biological resource, often the organism itself, which contains genetic material, which is often then translated through a process of sequencing into digital sequence information. Although that term has no official meaning yet, we all use it all the time. And then, of course, there is this thing called the derivative, which is possibly the most valuable part of this, because that is the product which is derived either directly from the gene or the organism or the digital sequence information to generate products that might be useful for humankind. So typically the process is pretty straightforward. You take a sample from the deep sea, you get something out of it. You might get a whole organism, but more likely than not, you're going to get a microorganism that you're interested in growing in large scale. That allows you then to get new materials. So you might extract the chemicals from them, or you might, by some other process, generate that material. You test that in some kind of testing process, and that might involve, efficacy as an enzyme, or you might test it against human diseases, and eventually you get something that commercializes it into a product. And that can take, depending on the type of product that it is, can take anything from months to years. So what are the benefits of doing this? Of course, you can look at almost any kind of biota, and the biodiversity in the deep sea, of course, is incredibly diverse compared to that on land. But often there's a huge economic barrier to actually exploiting deep sea resources for this kind of purpose. So you often need to have something that's better than anything that we can find from a terrestrial resource. So it needs to have a better performance or better economics. But more likely, it needs to have something that can do something that nothing else can do. So it needs to be an enzyme with a new activity, or a small molecule with a novel chemical structure, a new mechanism of action, or a material with a new property, such as the reversible underwater adhesive called gecko, which is based on the mussel byssus thread and a gecko foot. So it's a bizarre material, but it is, again, something that's uniquely different that makes it attractive to try and commercialize. And of course, the BBNJ agreement covers the equitable sharing of benefits, both monetary and non-monetary, that can be derived from such discoveries. In most cases, we see that a lot of effort has gone into deriving medicinal products mainly from reef derived organisms, because that's typically where people have been collecting materials, although people are now using fortuitous collections of deep sea organisms to do the same thing, although no product has gone to the market yet. But there's a lot of non-pharmaceutical products that might be more interesting as well. So some of those are, again, medicinal products. Some are cosmetic, some are for DNA processing. But the one that's of interest here, of course, is the idea of using enzymes for industrial processes or for generating things like biofuels. And this is a great example of something that was derived from a deep sea bacterium. And we don't know quite where it came from. We have tried to trace it back to its origin. And again, that comes back to the points that Lisa was making at the very beginning. that these are discoveries that enable genetic resource solutions to climate change. And that's the key to all of this. So let's look at a couple of examples of that. So here's an example, for instance, laundry detergents. You may have noticed that if you pick up a box of biological washing powder or laundry detergent, you might notice that it has a little label on the front that says it has enzymes in it that dissolve grease dirt. In this case, it says dissolves protein dirt. So these are quite interesting because they actually save a huge amount of energy. So we actually have to find organisms that can allow us to grow, allow us to run our washing machines at lower temperatures. And for that, we tend to make use of these cold adapted enzymes, which are derived from microorganisms living in temperatures between -2 and +20 degrees. And many of those are in the deep sea and in the open ocean and have very interesting microorganisms growing there. But the outcome of this, actually, it may seem very trivial, is that if you reduce your wash temperature from 40 degrees to 30 degrees, there's a 30% saving in electricity. If you translate that up to the 1% of the enzyme that is there, you actually reduce the amount of carbon dioxide produced by 100 kilograms for every kilogram of detergent enzyme produced. That includes the cost of producing as a full life cycle analysis. And then the company that came up with this information, this was done independently though, is that for one manufacturer of these enzymes, they produce 130,000 tons per year, equates to 13 million tons of carbon dioxide, presenting 100% of Denmark's or 5% of Germany's Kyoto target. So it's quite a large carbon dioxide saving. So again, washing powders are now going down to the temperature even 20 degrees. So again, we can save even more energy. So again, these kind of enzymes, they can do processes at low temperature are very attractive prospects for reducing the carbon impact of a lot of both commercial, industrial, and domestic processes. The other example is this idea of taking agricultural waste and crops and turning them into biodiesel. And again, there is always the controversy about using prime land for growing crops for biodiesel and biofuels, but again, it can be done with waste too. But they require a lot of enzymes that work at high temperatures. And of course, a really good place is to look at high temperature adapted organisms. And where do we find those? And deep sea thermal vents. So again, the deep sea can give us these really interesting enzymes that do this chemistry at very low temperature. So in brief, just to summarize all of that, we can think of direct uses of carbon dioxide uptake, and that can be, for instance, growing of algae and microalgae, that's supposed to say, to remove carbon dioxide and produce biofuels or polyunsaturated fatty acids, which are useful for animal feed and human nutrition. You can think of indirect ones, and this is always an interesting one to people. A lot of algal products are now being used to add to cattle feed to reduce their methane production. And again, methane, of course, is a very potent greenhouse gas. We could think of finding compounds that reduce nitrogen usage by crop plants and reduce the energy expended in making ammonia fertilizers. And there's a project I'm engaged in right now, so that's why I'm telling you about this. It's quite an interesting concept. It's two removes from reducing carbon dioxide, but what it is all about is the fact that ammonia is one of the biggest energy consumption industries in the world. So again, that's even a small percentage change there could make a huge difference to the carbon dioxide produced. And again, use of enzymes, we saw that already, and the use of enzymes for industrial processes. And a lot of that is because not only did they reduce energy usage, they reduce the need for chemicals, which are again expensive and sometimes dangerous to produce, and you reduce the waste production as well. So again, a lot of these are not just green in terms of their reduction in energy and carbon dioxide, energy usage and carbon dioxide production, but also in their basically the fact they're cleaner and they don't produce very much waste. So with that, I'll stop and invite questions. There we go. Go that way now. Oops. Hi. So we have a question from Partho there, I think.
Yeah, thank you. So I would say that the presentation was very nice, and my I think question rather than I would say it is a suggestion. If you can explore the blue hole, the blue holes also, and the unique biodiversity which they host, because and also I think the ecotones, like if we look at the ecotones particularly, that is the estuary and delta conditions. So because of edge effect, they are housing unique species. So with pollution, particularly I would not say only chemical pollution, thermal pollution and marine heat waves are also like something which we need to look at, particularly with coral bleaching and also the epizootics that come into place. So this is also affecting marine biodiversity adversely, so we need to address those issues also. Yeah. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, that's all true, indeed. A lot of the biodiversity I've worked on for many years in the coral reef environment is being destroyed because of the temperature change and pollution. So yeah, I agree totally. Lisa, please.
Hi, Marcel, I was wondering if you were aware of work on methane and carbon dioxide consumption by deep sea microbes from vents and seeps. And is anybody thinking about trying to actually put those microbes to work on land or elsewhere? I mean, they already work for us in the natural carbon cycle, but I'm just wondering, are you aware of any attempts to harness them for climate mitigation?
I think the only person I know that's doing this kind of thing is Colin Murrell in Warwick. I think he's working on methane oxidizing bacteria from the deep sea. And actually, if you think about that straight, you can take the methane oxidation and use that to turn it into methanol, which again could be used as a fuel or a chemical feedstock. So I don't know, that's a sort of tangential response to your question, but I don't know if anybody is directly looking at that. It's a bit far from my applications that I normally look for.
I think there's a lot of potential,
Yeah.
you know, but I think people aren't paying attention to it because methane seeps are full of both animals and microbes that consume methane and oxidize it and make it, you know, no longer a potent greenhouse gas.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was just thinking about that. It's quite interesting. I might have a chat to Colin and see if I can enthuse him into this. He might already be doing it. I have some questions from Sherry there. What is the carbon sequestration as a climate solution and other effects? Oh, sorry, Sherry, you want to just talk that question through rather than me reading it out?
Yeah, just really quickly, a number of our fertilizers end up as runoff across landscapes, but also within a number of deep sea pipelines. And we're just really curious as to whether or not there could be a natural or nature-based solution to this issue.
So the answer to this question is a big question. So there are the biggest issue is that there's ammonia that we put into the soil for fertilizer is oxidized to nitrate and is basically pumped into the atmosphere or runs off into the water. So plants produce natural compounds that inhibit that process called nitrification inhibitors, and if you can find those from any source, that is actually quite a useful thing to add to the soil to prevent that waste of ammonia, which means you reduce the amount of ammonia that runs off, but also the amount of ammonia is needed in the first place and the amount of energy that's needed. So yes, it's definitely being done. It's been looked at. It's just it's looking at nature's own way of doing that. And again, those compounds appear everywhere in nature, and we just look at things that can do that inhibition of those particular enzymic processes. Does that make sense? That's kind of a roundabout route. Yeah. A commercial or other biodiversity. And so there are some commercial. So there are some commercial products that are produced literally through a kind of chemical process, but there's others that are being discovered that are natural and they're biodegradable and everything else. So we discovered one recently. It's from a rice plant. It's a very small compound. But anyway, so these are all possible solutions in the future. But again, we have bred plants over the last 100 years at least to consume a lot of these fertilizers. And a lot of people are going back to ancient plants, ancient breeds. There's a big Danish project going on. There's the Barley Hub in Dundee doing the same kind of work. So there's a lot of stuff going on there to try and go back to plants that don't need as much nitrogen.
Thank you, Marcel. And I think we're running a little late, so I'll jump in there if there aren't pressing questions right at the moment, and we can move on to our fourth topic, which will be introduced by Christina Yerdi, High Seas Advisor to the International Union for Conservation of Nature and their Global Ocean Team, and this will address capacity building and transfer of marine technology. Christina.
Hello, hello. I am now trying to figure out how to share this again. Of course, it all works well when you're practicing. Okay, that's not doing it. Okay, which one are you seeing? The
We're
presentation?
seeing your presentation mode now. You can maybe try again.
I think we got it.
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Okay. Okay. My role is to talk about capacity building, transfer of marine technology, and how they relate to climate action under the BBNJ Agreement. I'm going to run through this quickly because I'm hoping there are people in the audience who know far more than I do. But I would just like to underscore the importance of this topic. Because as is recognized in the preamble of the BBNJ Agreement, capacity building, the transfer and development of marine technology are really central foundations, not just a pillar, but essential to the attainment of the core objectives of the BBNJ Agreement. If you don't have all hands on deck, if you don't have all countries enabled to actually participate, to both inform themselves and to make informed decisions in public, you will not be able to achieve the objectives of conservation and sustainable use. That was just looking at the broad base of objectives, because we're here talking about climate change and what we know and what we don't know. I'll just highlight point C, which is part of this is to develop the marine scientific and technological capacity, including with respect to research. What is going on in the deep ocean because of climate change? What technologies do we need in order to better understand that, to better learn and assess and continue to monitor? We need to be able to understand enough if we're going to increase and disseminate and share that knowledge and make good use of it. That's what we've just heard from Marcel is super important about, finding new ways to benefit from the genetic resources of individual species to help reduce climate impacts themselves. But my interest in marine genetic resources has also been in their role as a scientific research tool. I'm aware that Sheena Talma in the Seychelles uses environmental DNA to monitor fish populations. That's as part of fish stock assessments. That right now, with using genetic technologies, molecular tools, you can actually sort of start to understand what species are living in sort of the least known part of the ocean, which is the mesopelagic. That was, you can match up the environmental DNA with the video that you're able to take, and then start to understand what are the components of this ecosystem, and then ideally start to monitor their change. Thus, on area-based management tools, capacity building is really essential if we're actually going to put the vast majority of our planet in charge, in the driver's seat, when it comes to developing, implementing, monitoring, managing, and enforcing area-based management tools, including MPAs. I mean, we are on an ocean planet. If not every state has the capacity to identify, manage, and monitor MPAs, both within and beyond national jurisdiction, we'll only be able to achieve part of our global targets and what we really need. The other area that I'm excited about, of course, are environmental impact assessments. We've heard about their importance from Christine. That was to enable us to actually mitigate, manage, and prevent significant adverse impacts from proposed new activities. Thus, we also have the need for all states to be able to participate in this assessment process in order to better understand and to take the proper decisions when it comes to actually avoiding those significant adverse impacts. Strategic environmental assessments, we heard a bit of from Christine. And I think even though they're not mandatory, that was if we can find a way to ingrain them as one of the key tools for implementing all pillars of the BBNJ agreement, to collect and synthesize the best available information using those molecular tools such as environmental DNA to identify who is out there, what they're eating, and ideally how they are changing, to better understand what are the using marine scientific research beyond modeling to assess current potential future impacts, and then developing together a research plan to address some of these critical research gaps, data gaps going into the future. And it's that type of results that you can then use for spatial planning. Somebody asked about marine spatial planning. Yes, I mean, it can be a tool to inform that, just as it can be a tool to inform a system of area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. It informs your future EIAs as well as any future activities, monitoring of activities that may be allowed to go forward. So we can work the tool of strategic environmental assessments into our research plans as we're going out into areas beyond national jurisdiction. Scientists can have a huge role in sort of opening up the level of capacity and understanding, as well as the foundation for future informed management of our vast ocean beyond national jurisdiction, ideally in better bite-sized pieces at the area or regional scale. So I'll just close with saying that CBMT is literally the bedrock for climate action. That was, you need to be running full steam ahead on all the various pillars of the BBNJ agreement, and just wanted to flag many of Lisa's wonderful examples of how we can better integrate climate action, and also in what we've just heard from our colleagues. So with that, I will put you back all into the driver's seat. Thank you very much. Okay, and slideshow. Here we are. Okay, well, thank you. Now I'm hoping we have a good range of expertise and questions in the room. I see a few familiar names on the display. That was, although my key colleague, Angelique, has not been able to stay with us for the whole time. That was Olivier. I'm hoping you might have some ideas from your experience in the Pacific on how capacity building can really help to enable and enliven implementation of the BBNJ agreement in the context of climate change. Are you able to speak? Olivier Vai. Okay, we can come back to you. We have Partho and then Abigail. Please go ahead. First, Partho.
Yeah, thanks for the excellent presentation. So I am from India, so I would suggest that we have a few issues in India also. Like there is because of the wave erosion problem and the cyclone damage that is caused in the littoral areas. So I think we upskilling people in these nature-based solutions, particularly mangroves, and building seagrass meadows using native seagrass species can damp wave erosion and both cyclone damage to a great extent. So this is one of the things. And also what I feel is that in the other thing which we can look upon is, although that is not linked to the ocean, but I think so we can also look into areas like because bamboo is a species which is well known for its potential to rejuvenate groundwater. So in the arid regions, we can use it as a nature-based solution. And apart from that, I think capacity building could also involve like upskilling people in techniques like biorock accretion, because biorock accretion is a technique in which we can rejuvenate coral reefs, and we can improve the biodiversity in the ocean very effectively. So if we can train the people in this how to use this biorock accretion technique, I think it could be a vital shot in the arm. And also I think these units could be powered by floating solar photovoltaics. So it could training the people in these areas could be very nice. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Partha. I think you've accurately pointed out there's no end of things that we need knowledge of in order to better implement at home to help manage, mitigate, ameliorate climate change. And we're hoping the delegates at the Climate COP are listening to this and will start to open up their pocketbooks and make some of those climate finance funds more readily available. That was Abigail. Would you like to go? Explain your question, please. Okay, if everybody's had a chance to read it, I will try to say that this is a very important question that you've raised. And I think the Implementation and Client Compliance Committee doesn't have the power to ensure that the regulations set by the ISA don't undermine the BBNJ agreements. But they do have the ability to utilize the force of the parties to go in and say, these are not good enough. These regulations need to do more in order to protect the critical ecosystems that are potentially threatened by extraction. And I think that's really how we're hoping that the treaty will work. So, gotcha. Abigail. Are you able to turn on your microphone now, Abigail? And Olive, would you like to go now? Someone just jump in.
Well, maybe her microphone is still not working.
Okay. So who else has a question, please?
Well, I have a question. I was wondering, like how much of capacity building, I mean, how big are the differences between the way in which the BBNJ agreement sets out guidance for capacity building compared to within the UNFCCC, if you or anyone else has an idea of what the BBNJ agreement could bring in that in this sense?
Well, I'll take a partial stab and then I'm going to turn this over to Christine because she's rapidly nodding her head. I would just say there's the difference between the BBNJ agreement and UNCLOS is huge. That was the Mother Convention just sort of vaguely talks about ensuring development of capacity and transfer of marine technology, but doesn't go into creating the mechanisms that you actually need in order to make sure this happens. It doesn't create a financing mechanism. And those are the things that the BBNJ actually does. We have a capacity building committee. We have a finance committee. We have a implementation and compliance committee, and we have financial mechanisms that are put forward. So by making it a priority in the text of the agreement itself, it's better able to sort of see this whole package coming to fruition. Christine, please get me off the hook here.
I think your answer was perfect. It was spot on. And what I was going to say is perhaps this isn't differences, but we do see similarities, and that gives us an opportunity to learn lessons and to cooperate. So both agreements have established bodies or working groups to consider issues related to CBTMT, slightly different configurations, but we have the CBTMT committee under BBNJ, and we have similar arrangements under UNFCCC, clearinghouse mechanisms, matchmaking between people who can offer any CBTMT and those who have identified needs. So I know it's not at all what you asked, but I would like to rephrase it into what we can learn from each other and the amazing work that could be done if these two processes link together and work together going forward.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you Partha.
I will just mention one thing very quickly because of the paucity of time. So I would say that because all these are like very good suggestions, but if we look at countries which are inimical to each other, like India and Pakistan, and if we look at the if a war takes place in the Arabian Sea, or even a minor conflict also, which lasts for about a week or 2 weeks, so in that case, with the land with the mine laying by the navies in these areas, so the fragile ecosystems in these regions could be affected adversely. So we do need mechanisms to address these things also. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Susanna.
Yes, yes, thank you. We are out of time. So I want to say thank you to all our speakers, and thank you to all the participants for engaging so much in the speaking and in the chat as well. And I also want to thank the Global Ocean Forum and the organizers of the Virtual Ocean Pavilion for allowing us this space. Yes, thank you, everyone. And finally, I just want to point anyone who wants to learn more about DOSI, there's an exhibit within the Virtual Ocean Pavilion that you can go into, and there are people there to answer more questions about DOSI, and you can learn more about all the work that DOSI does. So with that, thank you to everyone.